Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty fascinating today, the power of words. You know how sometimes you just can't seem to get through to people no matter how clearly you think you're communicating?
Yeah, we've all been there.
Well, today we're going to unlock some secrets about how to actually make your words work for you, based on the book Words That Work by Dr. Frank Luntz.
Oh, Luntz. He's brilliant. He really gets how people react to language, especially in politics and business.
Because you can have the best ideas in the world, but if you can't communicate them effectively, they're basically useless.
Absolutely. It's like Luntz's famous saying, it's not what you say, it's what people hear.
So what's an example of that in action?
Well, Luntz starts his book off with this funny story about his mom. She used to yell, "Maria, the door," whenever she wanted her housekeeper, Maria, to answer the door.
Okay, sounds pretty normal. What's the problem?
Well, Maria was Spanish-speaking, and to her, having the name before the command sounded like she was in trouble. So she'd come to the door all flustered, thinking she'd done something wrong.
Wow, so even something that simple can get totally misinterpreted.
Exactly. And that's just in everyday life. Imagine the impact these kinds of misunderstandings can have in politics or business.
Huge. So what does Luntz suggest we do about it?
He lays out 10 rules of effective language, and while they're all important, I think the ones that will resonate most with you are simplicity, brevity, credibility, and visualization.
Okay, those sound practical. Can you break those down a bit?
Sure. Simplicity means using short, memorable words that really pack a punch. Think of slogans like "just do it" or "think different." Simple, yet unforgettable.
Makes sense. What about brevity?
That one's all about keeping it short and sweet, short sentences, no jargon, and straight to the point. It just makes your message way more impactful.
Like nobody wants to read a novel to figure out what you're trying to say.
Exactly. And Luntz tells this great story about giving out Nerf footballs to Republican members of Congress. They all said, "Talk to me on them."
Nerf footballs, what?
Because Republicans were being seen as kind of stuffy and out of touch. So it was a way to soften their image and encourage them to, well, talk to voters.
Oh, I get it. So using something unexpected to change perceptions, that covers simplicity and brevity. What about credibility?
That's about building trust. You need to be seen as knowledgeable and reliable. So using facts and figures, avoiding hyperbole, and definitely no empty promises.
Don't overpromise and underdeliver. Makes sense. How about visualization?
This one's a favorite of mine. Luntz says that if people can create a mental picture of what you're saying, they're way more likely to remember it. So use vivid language, tell stories, paint a picture with your words.
It's not just the words themselves, it's how they make the listener feel.
Precisely. And that brings us to another key takeaway from Luntz. Context and framing. The same word can have completely different impacts based on how it's presented.
Oh, like how welfare sounds so much more negative than assistance to the poor, even though they're basically the same thing.
Perfect example. It shows how word choice can really influence how people think and feel.
Okay, this is starting to feel like mind control. What are some other examples of this?
Well, Luntz talks about the success of American Express's "Don't Leave Home Without It" campaign.
Oh, yeah. Iconic.
It tapped into this fear of being stranded without money and then provided a simple, reassuring solution.
It created a feeling of security. So, again, not just the words, but how they connect with the audience emotionally.
Exactly. Luntz calls it relevance and emotional connection, something we can all use in our own lives. Think about how you frame things when you talk to people. Are you considering their perspective?
Good point. Now, you mentioned some case studies where language really made a difference. Let's dive into those.
Okay, let's start with a political one. The Contract with America. This was a document outlining the Republican Party's goals in the 1994 elections. Interestingly, they dropped the word Republican from the title.
Probably to make it appeal to more than just Republicans.
Exactly, and it worked. The Contract with America was hugely successful. It shows the power of inclusive language.
So again, not just what you say, but how you say it.
Right. And speaking of politically charged language, Luntz also analyzes the use of the term death tax instead of estate tax. Classic example of how word choice can sway public opinion.
Death tax definitely sounds scarier. Like, who wants to think about death and taxes at the same time?
Right. It plays on people's anxieties and makes the tax seem way worse.
Okay, so we've seen how choosing the right words can really make a message stick. But what about when it backfires?
Oh, Luntz has plenty of examples of that, too. Like, remember President Bush's "Bring It On" comment during the Iraq War? Meant to sound tough, but it ended up coming off as reckless.
Yeah, not a good look.
And what's interesting is that Luntz claims John Kerry Bush's opponent could have used that same phrase to his advantage.
Really?
Luntz said Kerry could have responded with something like, "I'll bring it on the troops home," turning it around and highlighting Bush's perceived recklessness while emphasizing his own commitment to ending the war.
Wow, that would be powerful.
It really shows how the right words at the right time can completely change the game.
Okay, that's some heavy political stuff. What about the business world? Does this language magic work there too?
Absolutely. One example Luntz gives is how shifting from calling it liquor to spirits helped revitalize that industry.
Interesting. What difference does that make? Liquor and spirits seem pretty much the same to me.
Yeah, but liquor had this image of being, your grandpa's dusty bottle of scotch. Spirits sounded more sophisticated, modern, kind of cool even.
Like rebranding the whole experience.
Exactly. It made the industry more appealing, especially to younger generations.
So it's about using language to tell a story that connects with what people value.
You got it. And Luntz says this idea of storytelling is essential for any organization that wants to really resonate with its audience.
Okay, so we've seen how powerful language can be in politics and business, but what about for us regular folks? How can we put this stuff to work?
Well, Luntz busts some myths about language and people, and one of the big ones is that Americans are well-informed. He says we often assume people know more than they do, and that can lead to big communication breakdowns.
Okay, give me an example of that.
He cites some statistics about voter knowledge, and they're pretty shocking. Like on election night in 2004, a lot of voters didn't even know who the vice president was.
Wow. You'd think that would be basic knowledge.
You would. And that means we need to be careful about assuming everyone's on the same page. Be clear, avoid jargon, and don't be afraid to explain things even if they seem basic.
So don't overestimate people's knowledge. Got it. What other myths does he debunk?
Another big one is about what he calls the fed-ups. This is a growing group of people who are just disillusioned with politics, the economy, the whole system.
Yeah, you can definitely feel that out there.
And Luntz says ignoring this sentiment is a huge mistake. You have to acknowledge it and address it.
So no sugarcoating or pretending everything's fine. You have to meet people where they are.
Exactly. Validate their feelings and offer solutions that actually speak to their experience.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've talked about what to avoid, but how do we actually use language to achieve our goals? What words does Luntz suggest we use more of?
He has a list of words for the 21st century, words that really resonate with modern audiences. They tap into our desires and values.
Okay, hit me with some of those.
Well, one of the most powerful, according to Luntz, is imagine. It allows people to tap into their dreams.
It's not about telling people what to think, but inviting them to picture something better.
Exactly. And think about how effective it's been. Ford's Imagine campaign, for example. It painted a picture of a better America.
Great example. One word can evoke so much. What else is on the list?
Another good one is hassle-free. Speaks to our desire for simplicity in a world that's often so complicated.
Yeah, who doesn't want things to be easier?
Right. Think about all the products and services that promise to be hassle-free. It's a huge selling point.
Okay, so imagine and hassle-free. What else?
Lifestyle is another big one. It acknowledges that people value different things, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach anymore.
So tailoring your message to what matters to specific people.
Exactly. And this word's been used effectively everywhere, from advertising to politics. Like, think about Olay's Love the Skin You're In campaign. It's all about self-acceptance and empowerment.
It's about using language to promote positive values? That's awesome. What other words should we be paying attention to?
Two more I think are really key are accountability and results.
Those seem pretty straightforward. What makes them so special?
Well, accountability reflects how much people want transparency and responsibility, especially from institutions. No more empty promises. They want to see action.
Walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Right. And results emphasizes tangible outcomes and a can-do attitude, showing people you can actually deliver.
In a world where it often feels like there's a lot of talk and not enough action, those words really cut through the noise.
Exactly. They're clear and action-oriented. And Luntz gives tons of examples of how they've been used effectively in both advertising and political campaigns.
Okay, this has been eye-opening already. But before we get too carried away, what are some of the key things we've learned so far in this first part of our deep dive?
I think the biggest one is that language is powerful. It can shape how we see the world, affect our decisions, even determine our success.
Yeah, and it's not about using big words or being fancy. It's about understanding how language works, choosing our words carefully, and using them strategically.
Exactly. And Luntz's book gives us the tools to do just that.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already, but I know there's so much more to explore. What can we look forward to in the next part?
Well, we're going to dive deeper into Luntz's advice for specific situations, like everyday conversations, corporate communication, and of course, more on the fascinating world of politics.
I'm hooked already. See you in part 2.
See you, Owen.
Welcome back to our deep dive into words that work. Ready for more linguistic magic?
Oh, absolutely. Hit me with it.
All right, so we've talked about some of the big ideas from Luntz, but now let's get tactical and look at how to use these insights in specific situations.
Love it. Give me the good stuff.
Well, Luntz has a whole chapter on using language effectively in personal scenarios, like everyday stuff. He gives advice on things like how to get a table at a crowded restaurant.
Ooh, that's a skill I could use. What's the secret?
Or how about getting on a flight that's already closed? You know, when they're at the gate and it's looking hopeless.
Okay, yeah, now you're talking my language, especially during the holidays.
He really stresses being polite but firm and framing your request so it highlights what the other person gets out of it, not just what you want.
So like finding that win-win.
Exactly. It's all about understanding how people think and using language to smooth those social situations.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me some of those Luntz-approved tactics.
All right, so for that restaurant situation, imagine you walk up to the host, all smiles, and you say something like, "We're flexible on timing, but we'd love to snag a table if anything opens up in the next hour. Is there a waiting list we could join?"
So instead of just demanding a table, you're offering them options and showing you're willing to work with them.
Exactly. You're not being pushy, you're being accommodating.
Smart. Okay, now I need that magic phrase for getting on that overbooked flight. Lay it on me.
Luntz says, stay calm, be respectful, and try this. "I understand the flight is full, but I have a really important meeting tomorrow morning. Is there any way I could possibly be squeezed on? I'd be so grateful."
So you're acknowledging their situation, clearly stating your need, and appealing to their good nature.
Right. Being polite, but persistent. Not demanding, but respectfully asking for their help.
I love it. Okay, so beyond these everyday scenarios, what about the corporate world? How does this language magic work there?
Well, Luntz says it's not enough for companies to just have great products or services. They need to create a strong brand identity that people connect with.
So it's about having a clear personality and communicating it effectively.
You got it. He talks about Jack Welch, the CEO of GE. Welch was famous for being blunt and direct, and his words could really motivate people.
Didn't he say something like, companies don't give job security, only satisfied customers do?
Yep, that's the one. Bold statement, but it cuts to the chase and tells you what matters in business.
I mean, he's not wrong. Do you think that kind of straight talk can be risky, though?
It can be, for sure. But it worked for Welch because it fit his style and the culture he wanted at GE. It's about finding language that's authentic to your brand and resonates with your audience.
Authenticity. That's a word we hear a lot these days.
And for good reason. Luntz says people can spot a fake a mile away. If your words don't match your actions, you've lost them.
So it's not just about talking the talk, it's about walking the walk as well.
Exactly. And that goes for individuals just as much as for companies.
Okay, what else does Luntz have to say about communicating in the corporate world?
He talks about how important it is to be proactive, especially now when everyone's so sensitive to everything. He uses the phrase, silence equals guilt.
Oh, that's a powerful one. It really highlights why transparency is so important.
Right. If a company's not saying anything, it looks like they're hiding something.
Like they're confirming everyone's worst fears.
Exactly. And Luntz argues that it's always better to be open and honest, even if the news isn't great.
So rip off that Band-Aid and address the issue head-on, even if it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. It might sting a little at first, but in the long run, it builds trust.
He gave some real-world examples of this, right?
I did. He talked about how credit unions have been so successful at positioning themselves as more personal and community-focused than big banks.
Oh, yeah. They always talk about serving their members and being locally owned.
Exactly. They use language that highlights their values and makes them stand out from the big, impersonal banks.
So it's about crafting a message that speaks to people's values and aspirations.
Exactly. Luntz argues that this kind of storytelling is essential for any organization that wants to make a real connection with people.
Okay, so we've talked personal scenarios and corporate communication. Let's get back to politics. What else does Luntz have to say about that arena?
Well, He goes deep on a bunch of political case studies, showing what worked and what didn't.
Okay, I'm ready for some more winning words and epic fails. Lay 'em on me.
He revisits that contract with America example, but this time he focuses on the word contract. Using that word implied a real agreement with the people, not just vague promises.
It created a sense of obligation, like they were actually going to do what they said.
Right. And he also talks about how saying parental choice instead of school choice changed how people saw the education debate.
How so? I mean, they both seem to be about giving parents more options, right?
True, but school choice can sound like it's about the schools, while parental choice focuses on the parents and their rights.
Ah, I see. Putting the emphasis on the individual.
Exactly. It taps into those core values about family and freedom.
That's subtle but effective. What other examples did he give?
He talks about how the phrase exploring for energy was used instead of drilling for oil.
Oh, yeah. One sounds way more positive and adventurous than the other.
Right. It's a way to soften something that might be controversial.
So, choosing your words to frame the issue in a way that resonates with people.
Exactly. And Luntz says this is especially crucial in politics, where things can get very emotional and language can be used to mislead people.
Okay, we've seen some great examples of language being used effectively in politics, but what about those myths and realities about language that we talked about before? What else does Luntz have to say about that?
He goes beyond those stats about what voters know and looks at the mindset of the fed-ups, those folks who are just fed up with the system. He says if you ignore them, you do so at your own peril.
So it's not just about understanding how language works, it's about understanding the people you're trying to reach.
Absolutely. And the fed-ups are a powerful force right now. They feel like the system is rigged against them.
So how do you talk to a group like that? They don't sound very receptive.
Luntz says you have to acknowledge their frustration, address their concerns head-on, and offer solutions that make sense to them.
So no pretending everything's fine. You got to be real with them.
Exactly. Meet them where they are, validate their feelings, and be genuine.
That makes sense. So beyond specific words and phrases, what overall advice does Luntz give for being a better communicator?
Well, we touched on it before, but authenticity is key. Luntz says you can't fake it. People can sense when you're not being real.
So your words have to match your actions. It's about being true to yourself.
Exactly. He gives examples of politicians and business leaders who were successful because they were seen as genuine. People like John McCain, who is known for being straight-talking, and Ronald Reagan, who embodied family values.
They seem like they meant what they said. That makes their words more powerful.
Absolutely. And that's something that goes beyond just politics or business. It's about being true to yourself and letting that come through in how you communicate.
Okay, I love that. So we've covered a lot here, from everyday conversations to corporate messaging to political strategy. But before we go to the final part of our deep dive, is there anything else about these words for the 21st century that we should touch on?
Yeah, actually. We talked about imagine, hassle-free, and lifestyle. But there's a whole category of words that Luntz says are super effective. He calls them the re-words. Words like renew, revitalize, restore, and rekindle.
Re-words, what's so special about them?
They all have this sense of positive change, of taking something old and making it new again.
So instead of focusing on the negative, they focus on what's possible.
Exactly. And that really resonates with people today. We live in a world that's constantly changing, so we're drawn to ideas that offer hope and a fresh start.
I can see how those words would be powerful in all kinds of situations.
They tap into our desire for improvement and transformation. They offer optimism, which is something we all need, especially these days.
Okay, I'm adding re-words to my vocabulary right now. Anything else from Luntz as we wrap up this part?
One last thing he stresses is that language never stops changing. What works today might not work tomorrow.
So we can't just learn a few magic words and call it good.
Definitely not. It's about being curious, noticing how language is being used around you, and always learning and adapting.
So, in addition to reading words that work, we should be paying attention to how people are using language in everyday life.
Absolutely. Pay attention to politicians, marketers, even your friends and family. The more you observe, the more you'll understand how language really works.
It's like we're becoming language detectives. I'm ready to put on my magnifying glass and start analyzing.
That's the spirit. So, what's next in our deep dive?
Well, in the final part, we're going to bring all these insights together and look at how you can use Luntz's wisdom to be a more effective communicator in every area of your life.
Sounds like the perfect way to wrap things up.
I can't wait. Welcome back. I don't know about you, but all this talk about words that work has really got me thinking about, well, the words I use.
It's powerful stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we've covered so much already.
We have. But as we wrap up our deep dive into Luntz's work, what's the one thing you really hope listeners will take away from all this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that language, at its core, is about connection. It's not just about the words themselves, but about understanding who you're talking to, what they care about, and using language to really bridge that gap between what you want to say and what they actually hear.
It's like we've been given this secret code book for better communication.
Exactly. We've learned how to craft messages that resonate, that persuade, even inspire. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It is, but it's not about manipulating people, right? It's about using language as a tool to build understanding and connection.
Absolutely. And Luntz is very clear about this. This power comes with responsibility. We have to be mindful of how we use language and make sure we're using it ethically and authentically.
So we've got the code book, we've got the responsibility. What else do we need as we go out there and put all this into practice?
One thing Luntz emphasizes is the importance of speaking aspirationally. Don't just focus on the problems, offer solutions. Paint a picture of a better future that gets people excited.
Ooh, I like that. It's like using that imagine power we talked about.
Exactly. Think about Ronald Reagan's Morning in America campaign. It focused on hope and optimism, not just the challenges of the time.
And it worked. People bought into that vision of a better tomorrow.
Exactly. And it's a principle we can use every day. Leading a team, giving a presentation, even just chatting with a friend. Speaking aspirationally can make a huge difference.
So focus on the positive, highlight the possibilities, and get people inspired.
You got it. Now remember those words for the 21st century we talked about?
Oh yeah. Imagine, hassle-free, lifestyle, accountability, and results. Anything else we should add to that list?
A few more Luntz highlights are certified and peace of mind.
Those are interesting. Why those two?
Well, certified gives people a sense of trust. Like, in a world where there's so much information out there, certified means something has been vetted, it's reliable.
It's like a stamp of approval, so you know you can trust it.
Exactly. And then peace of mind. I mean, who doesn't want that? In today's world, anything that promises less stress is going to be a winner.
Makes sense. Those are definitely going into my vocabulary rotation. What else is on Luntz's list?
One more he emphasizes is independent.
Oh, independent. Why that one?
It taps into our desire for individuality and freedom. You know, in a world where it feels like everyone's trying to fit in, independent stands out.
It's about empowering people to be themselves and make their own choices.
Exactly. And it's been used effectively everywhere. It speaks to this deep need for freedom and self-reliance.
Okay, we've got a lot of great words to work with now, but before we wrap up completely, I want to go back to something you said before about language always changing. How do we keep up? How do we make sure we're still communicating effectively as language evolves?
That's such a great question. And Luntz actually gives us some great advice. He says we have to stay curious, pay attention to how people are using language all around us, and just constantly be learning and refining our own communication skills.
So reading words that work is just the beginning. We have to become students of language and how it's being used in the real world.
Exactly. Listen to how politicians use it, how marketers use it, even just your friends and family. How are they using language to persuade, to inform, to connect?
It's like becoming a language detective.
I love that. The more you observe, the more those patterns will start to emerge, and the better you'll understand how it all works.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I'm seeing language and communication in a whole new light.
Me too. It's exciting, isn't it?
It is. So, as we say goodbye for now, what's the final message you want to leave with our listeners?
Here's what I'd say. Language is incredibly powerful. It can shape how we think, influence our decisions, even determine our success in life. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility. We have to use language wisely, authentically, and always with the goal of building understanding and connection.
Beautifully said. So to all our listeners out there, I encourage you to explore words that work for yourselves. It's a fascinating read that will totally change how you think about communication. And as you go about your day, pay attention to the words you use and the words you hear. They really do matter more than you might think.
And until next time, happy communicating.